Yesterday I talked at length about Papaji's life, particularly stressing all the incidents that happened after he left Bhagavan in 1947. I've been asked today to do a little supplementary section on any specific interactions between Bhagavan and Papaji that took place in the ashram, and in particular anything that illustrates the relationship that exists between Papaji and Bhagavan. Now, last time I spoke, I mentioned that when Papaji first came here, he walked into the old hall and said, "Can you show me God?" And Bhagavan said, "I cannot show you God because God is the seer. God is not an object that can be seen." Now, Papaji said that after that particular piece of unwanted information, he had a rather extraordinary experience. I'll go into that later, but I found out about this experience because when I first met Papaji in 1992, I asked him a question which I had been researching at the time, and it was about the heart in Ramana Maharishi's teachings. Now, Bhagavan sometimes talks about this heart center on the right side of the chest. There are some well-known teaching statements on that. But there's a much less well-known teaching category, let's call it that, in which he very occasionally said that there was a kind of cavity, a very, very tiny hole in the spiritual heart, and that in unenlightened people it was closed, and that when full enlightenment took place, it opened and remained fully open. And as a kind of similar analogy, he said to Ganapati Muni that prior to liberation there was what he called a downward facing bud or flower of some sort, that upon liberation this downward facing bud went upwards, it bloomed and it opened, and at that moment that was when you had full liberation. Now this seems quite antithetical to a lot of other of Bhagavan's teachings, and I was never quite sure whether Bhagavan was just talking to people who'd done some Kundalini yogi, who liked these kind of images and metaphors. But there are enough scattered instances to indicate that sometimes he did talk about this, and he did seem to be saying that there was something quite physical in the body that opened and stayed open at the moment of liberation. So I asked Papaji about this, and that's when he told me about this first experience he had with Ramana Maharishi. He said, "I went there, I got this answer which I didn't like, and then Bhagavan looked at me." And this is what he wrote, or what I wrote down. He said, "Bhagavan's words did not impress me. They seemed to me to be yet one more excuse to add to the long list of those I had heard from Swamis all over the country. He had promised to show me God, yet now he was trying to tell me that not only could he not show me God, no one else could either. I would have dismissed him and his words without a second thought, had it not been for an experience I had immediately after he had told me to find out who was this I who wanted to see God. At the conclusion of his words, he looked at me, and as he gazed into my eyes, my whole body began to tremble and shake. A thrill of nervous energy shot through my body. My nerve endings felt as if they were dancing, and my hair stood on end. Within me I became aware of the spiritual heart. This is not the physical heart. It is rather the source and support of all that exists. Within the heart I saw or felt something like a closed bud. It was very shiny and bluish. With the Maharshi looking at me, and with myself in a state of inner silence, I felt this bud open and bloom. I use the word bud, but this is not an exact description. It would be more correct to say that something that felt bud-like opened and bloomed within me in the heart. And when I say heart, I don't mean that the flowering was located in a particular place in the body. This heart of my heart, was neither inside the body nor out of it. I can't give a more exact description of what happened. All I can say is that, in the Maharshi's presence and under his gaze, the heart opened and bloomed. It was an extraordinary experience, and one that I'd never had before. I had not come looking for any kind of experience, so it totally surprised me when it happened. Now, I only ever heard Papaji tell that story once, and it was in response to this question about the spiritual heart. In Ramanashram literature, there is only one recorded instance of Papaji talking to Bhagavan, and that, interestingly enough, is also about the spiritual heart. After Papaji had this experience on his first visit, he had the knowledge, the experience, the conviction that the heart wasn't located in any particular place. So when he later came to discover that Bhagavan was speaking of the spiritual heart on the right-hand side of the chest, he went to Bhagavan and said, what's going on here? Tell me about this. So I'll just read that out because it's the only recorded instance of Papaji speaking with Bhagavan in ashram books. This is Devaraji Mudalia speaking, the compiler of Day by Day. When I entered the hall in the afternoon, Bhagavan was already explaining an answer to some questions put by Mr. Punja, a Punjabi. Bhagavan says, I ask you to see where the eye arises in your body, but it is not really quite correct to say that the eye rises from and merges in the heart and the right side of the chest. The heart is another name for reality. It is neither inside nor outside the body. There can be no in or out for it, since it alone is. I do not mean by heart any physiological organ or any plexus of nerves or anything like that, but so long as one identifies oneself with the body and thinks he is in the body, he is advised to see where in the body the eye thought rises and merges again. It must be the heart at the right side of the chest, since every man of whatever race and religion, and in whatever language he may be saying I, points to the right side of the chest to indicate himself. This is so all over the world, so that must be the place. And by keenly watching the daily emergence of the I thought on waking and its subsiding in sleep, one can see that it is this heart on the right side. Now there's something interesting for me about this particular answer, because Bhagavan is saying that he gives out this information on the heart center to those people who identify with the body, who need a specific location in the body to source it. I think he knew at this point, talking to Papaji, that Papaji had transcended his body identification. So he's saying, in effect, I give this advice out to people who are still identified with the body, and if they are in that state, then this particular sequence of information about the eye rising from and back to this heart center is correct. But once you know, as I know you know, that the heart is immanent in all things, then it's no longer a valid description. So for me, reading between the lines, I think this is Bhagavan saying, I know you're in this state, we really know what the heart is. What I'm saying about the heart center is really for people who identify with the body. Now, I want to talk a little bit about just what a high regard Papaji had for Bhagavan. Couple of stories. I asked him once in Lucknow, I said, I was just not really joking, but just asking, do you regret anything you've done in your life? A lot of strange things have happened to you, some odd things that you probably wish hadn't happened. Do you have any regrets in your life? And he said, no regrets. And then about 5 minutes later, he looked at me and he said, David, I only have one regret, and that's that I'm no longer physically capable of throwing myself full length on the ground at the feet of my master. He said, I've got an old body, I've got diabetes. He said, I can't even put my pants on by myself anymore. If I want to get dressed, somebody has to help me. I really, really miss getting up in the morning and throwing myself full length on the floor at the feet of Bhagavan's picture. And there's a story that he told which is the source, I think, of his gratitude. Well, apart from the experience he had at Ramanashram, it shows you why he revered Bhagavan and why he had such love, admiration and respect for him. He was sitting on the banks of the Ganga in the 1960s or 70s, and he said for no reason at all, he just went into a kind of incredibly long, elaborate vision in which he saw all of his past lives. He said not recent human ones, he just said it was an incredible list going over millions and millions of years. And he said, although the experience in planet Earth time might only have lasted a few seconds or a few minutes, he said as he went through them all again, he actually felt he was having the full time of each birth. It just seemed an incredibly long experience. He said birth after birth after birth, animals, plants, people. And then he said after the last birth, he said a huge luminous picture of Ramana Maharishi appeared, and I looked at this picture and I knew that this whole sequence of births and deaths had ended by the intervention and grace of my master, that he had appeared and put an end to this interminable sequence of suffering, this interminable sequence of birth after birth. He said that is reason alone for me to have the feelings I have towards my master. He ended my suffering, he brought me liberation, and he severed my births forever. I never have to come back and suffer again. Now, there's one final thing that I want to read. In early 1990s, he was giving satsang to an increasingly large group of mostly foreign people in Lucknow. And one person came up and gave, what most people would regard as a very respectful greeting to him. And Papaji didn't like this greeting at all. And I'll read you the story, and this will be my final comment on Bhagavan and Punjaji, because I think this summarizes his relation perfectly. A few months ago, at one of the satsangs I conduct in Lucknow, someone gave me a note which concluded, "My humble respects and gratitude to you, especially to one who was a disciple of Ramana Maharishi." I got irritated. I couldn't let this pass. "Why do you say was?" I exclaimed. "Please correct your grammar. Please correct your grammar. I am his disciple. He is my master. How can I throw him away into the past? There is no past and no future for the master. There isn't even a present, because he has transcended time. When I left him physically in 1947, he told me, 'I am with you wherever you are.' That was his promise, and that is my experience. There is no one called Punja left anymore. There is only an emptiness where he used to be. And in that emptiness there shines the I that is my real reality, the I that is my master, the I that he promised would be with me wherever I am. Whenever I speak, it is not someone called Punja who is speaking. It is the I that is the Maharishi who speaks, the I which is the self in the heart of all beings." I tried to explain this to the person who sent me the note. I continued, "Who am I? What am I? I never think it is I, Punja, who am speaking. It is he, the Maharishi, the Master, who is speaking. If I ever thought that this person called Punja was speaking to you, I would have no right to sit here, because whatever would come out of my mouth would be false. It is my own Master who speaks. It is your Master who speaks. It is your own heart speaking. It is your own self which is speaking to you. There is no one here claiming to be an intermediary. There is no one here claiming that he once had a master called Sri Ramana Maharishi. There is only emptiness, and in that emptiness the I which is, not was, my master speaks. I am sitting here introducing you to my teacher and his teachings. He is the teacher, not I. He is your own self. He is the teacher of the world. He was the teacher before you even knew him. He was there, waiting for you, smiling within your heart. Now you're attracted by him, not me. I, Punja, am not in the picture at all. Punja has gone for good, but the Master remains and will always remain. He is seated in my heart as my own imperishable self, shining as the I he alone is.